Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're doing something a bit wild. We're going to compress over 4,000 years of the entire history of China, from ancient to modern, into one epic story of resilience, unity, and renewal. From the very first footprint along the Yellow River all the way to the dawn of a modern republic, this is a massive, incredibly complex, and just absolutely fascinating journey. Okay, let's map out our journey real quick across 5 distinct eras on our agenda today. 1, origins and the Mandate. 2, First Empires and Golden Ages. 3, the Grand Cosmopolis. 4, Conquerors and Restoration. And finally, 5, the Fall of Empire. This is going to give us a nice, structured path through the millennia, so we don't get totally lost in the centuries. So let's jump right into Section 1, Origins and the Mandate, the roots of civilization. We're starting at the very beginning, right where early humans transitioned from wandering hunter-gatherers into settled farmers along China's great waterways. Now, notice the stark geographical split here, because it's actually super important. Up in the dry, freezing north along the Yellow River, early communities relied heavily on farming millet. But down south, folks were mastering this incredibly labor-intensive rice cultivation in the wet, humid wetlands of the Yangtze River. And honestly, this ancient contrast shaped regional diets and cultures so deeply that it still echoes today. It's essentially the historical reason why modern northern China prefers noodles and the south prefers rice. Out of those early farming settlements rose the Qin Dynasty, which established a highly complex, deeply hierarchical society. Bronze metallurgy exploded, and kings wielded absolute, unquestioned authority. They actually used these things called oracle bones to divine the future and talk to the spirit world, which amazingly gave us China's very first written records. We also start seeing powerful, really surprising figures emerge, like Lady Fu Hao. She was a queen consort, but also a formidable military general, just a total powerhouse. Now here's a concept you absolutely have to know: the Mandate of Heaven. This was a political and spiritual philosophy brought in by the subsequent Zhou Dynasty, just to justify conquering the Shang. It basically said that a ruler governs with the direct blessing of the cosmos. But and here's the catch: that blessing can be withdrawn if the ruler gets corrupt or ignores the people. This brilliant little idea became the ultimate cheat code. It was the eternal engine driving the rise and fall of literally every single empire that followed. So, looking at the eventual decline of those Zhou kings, that begs a really fascinating question. What actually happens to a civilization when this cosmic mandate fractures and completely falls apart? Well, the answer is chaos, a brutal period of fragmentation known as the Warring States period. And that forged our next era, Section 2, First Empires and Golden Ages, the first unifications. Emerging from that chaos, the short-lived Qin Dynasty unified China through legalism. And legalism was harsh. We're talking absolute discipline, severe punishments, and total central control. But then that system gets entirely flipped on its head by the Han Dynasty that followed. They favored moral governance, virtue, and Confucian ideals. Imagine the whiplash for a citizen back then, right? Going from terrifying absolute state surveillance to suddenly being governed by ideals of morality, education, and family duty. It was a completely radical shift. And you know what? That softer Confucian approach worked remarkably well. The Han Dynasty lasted over 400 years. To put that in perspective, that's roughly the same amount of time from the European Renaissance all the way to today. It kicked off a profound golden age that opened the famous Silk Road, and it cemented a Chinese identity so incredibly strong that the majority ethnic group in China still proudly calls themselves the Han people today. Moving right along to Section 3, the Grand Cosmopolis, unprecedented heights. Let's see how China rebuilt itself into an era of just mind-blowing cultural achievements after a few intervening centuries of warlords and division. It's basically a tale of 2 pivotal dynasties here. First, the Sui Dynasty ruthlessly reunified the land and built the massive Grand Canal, but they fatally overreached. The grueling labor demands and failed foreign wars were just too much. That paved the way for the Tang Dynasty, who swooped in, capitalized on that foundation, and turned their capital, Chang'an, into this thriving, highly diverse global cosmopolis. They were welcoming merchants and faiths from all across Eurasia. Then we get the Song Dynasty, and honestly, the innovation here is staggering. They didn't govern with military aristocrats. They used brilliant scholar officials who had to pass these notoriously rigorous exams. This vibrant era brought the world fast-ripening rice, the very first widespread use of paper money, gunpowder weapons, and the magnetic compass. Think about that for a second. They were essentially using modern economic tools and high-tech inventions, while Europe was still fumbling through the Dark Ages. But it wasn't all just endless progress. As the era's great poets chronicled so beautifully, the grandeur of the empire was constantly shadowed by the fragility of human life. There was internal turmoil, and of course, those ever-looming military threats from nomadic groups up on the northern steppes. And those threats? They definitely materialized in Section 4, Conquerors and Restoration, a shift in the mandate. This period proved beyond a doubt that the mandate of heaven wasn't just reserved for native Chinese rulers. Enter the Mongols. United under Genghis Khan, they swept across Eurasia, just absolutely crushing northern states with advanced cavalry and brutal siegecraft. Eventually, his grandson Kublai Khan defeated the Song and established the Qin Dynasty. For the very first time in history, all of China was under foreign rule, seamlessly hooked into a massive global network. But wait, the native Han bounced back and reclaimed the mandate under the Ming Dynasty. In a stunning reversal, a literal peasant named Zhu Yuanzhang leads a grassroots rebellion that kicks out the mighty Mongols. The Ming then set out to rebuild Chinese pride. They constructed the majestic Forbidden City in Beijing, projected unparalleled power across the oceans with Admiral Zhang Hei's massive fleets, and fueled a booming global trade driven entirely by a silver economy. However, corruption, factionalism, and some seriously crippling economic crises from silver shortages eventually took their toll on the Ming. Which leaves us asking a pretty ironic question. How does such a brilliant, globally dominant state just crumble to outsiders once again? Which brings us to our fifth and final era, Section 5, the fall of empire, the end of imperial rule. This covers the last imperial house, the Qing, and the dramatic, total collapse of China's dynastic system. So outsiders take over again, the Manchus, who swept in from just beyond the Great Wall to establish the Qin Dynasty, and initially, incredible prosperity. During their golden age under rulers like Kangxi and Qianlong, they expanded the borders further than ever before. It's actually a striking irony of history that China reached its absolute maximum territorial extent under outsider rulers, who carefully blended their own military heritage with traditional Confucian statecraft to win the people over. But then the 19th century hits. And it hits hard. A rapid, devastating unraveling begins. In 1839, the First Opium War exposed just how starkly vulnerable the Qing military was to Western industrial powers. That was followed by the Taiping Rebellion, a civil war so catastrophic it claimed tens of millions of lives, making it one of the bloodiest conflicts in human history. By 1900, anti-foreign uprisings erupted, and finally, in 1912, the last emperor abdicated. The Qing's illusion of superiority was permanently shattered. You can really feel the desperation of that late era in the rallying cry of the Boxer Uprising, support the Qing, destroy the foreign. It's the sound of a society tearing itself apart, tragically resorting to martial arts and spiritual fervor in a totally desperate bid to fight off the modern guns and cannons of unstoppable foreign powers. From those ashes, though, a new vision emerged. Sun Yat-sen envisioned a modern republic built on three equal pillars: nationalism, democracy, and the people's livelihood. This bold experiment officially ended over 2 millennia of unbroken imperial rule, pointing the nation toward a completely new horizon. So, I want to leave you with this one final provocative thought. As China navigated the extreme turbulence of the 20th century, did that ancient mandate of heaven actually disappear forever? Or, in the shift from emperors to a modern nation-state, did those fundamental cycles of unity, fragmentation, and renewal simply change their name?